I stepped out of my condo, desperate for fresh air after a grueling day of trading. The park across the street beckoned, its manicured lawns a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind. As I approached, a familiar voice cut through the evening air. "I saw you cheating on your wife last night. You shouldn't be here," Zachary shouted, causing heads to turn. My heart skipped a beat. There, in the middle of the park, stood my ex-husband Kevin, with a young blonde draped over his arm. Zachary, red-faced and trembling, pointed an accusing finger at them. I froze, rooted to the spot. Kevin's eyes met mine, a flicker of surprise quickly replaced by a smug grin. "Claire?" he called out, his voice dripping with false warmth. "What a surprise to see you here. Come, join us." My feet moved of their own accord, propelling me towards the unfolding drama. As I drew closer, I recognized the blonde as Brooke, the woman Kevin had left me for barely a year ago. "Hello, Kevin." I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. Brooke's lips curled into a sneer. "Oh, look, it's the ex-wife, still living in that tiny condo, Claire. I thought you'd have moved on by now." I bit back a retort, focusing instead on Zachary. "What's going on here?" Zachary turned to me, his eyes wild. "This man," he spat, gesturing at Kevin, "is cheating on his wife. I saw him with another woman last night." Kevin laughed, a sound that once made my knees weak but now sent chills down my spine. "Zachary, you're confused. Brooke here is my girlfriend. Claire and I divorced last year." "That's not who I saw you with," Zachary insisted. A crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the spectacle. I felt their eyes on me, pitying, curious, judgmental. My cheeks burned. Now, Kevin said, his tone patronizing. "Let's not make a scene. Claire, why don't you take your friend home? He seems unwell." "He's not my friend," I snapped, "and I'm not going anywhere." Brooke giggled, a high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, honey, still can't let go, can you? It's sad, really. Kevin told me how dependent you were, but I had no idea it was this bad." I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms. "I am not dependent on anyone, least of all Kevin." Kevin stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. I flinched away from his touch. "Claire, sweetheart, why don't you go home? You look tired. Trading must be so stressful for you these days." His condescension ignited a fire in my chest. "Don't you dare patronize me, Kevin. I'm doing just fine without you." "Are you?" Brooke interjected, "because from where I'm standing, it looks like your life fell apart after the divorce. Still single, still in that same job, still living in that tiny condo. Meanwhile, Kevin and I are thriving." I opened my mouth to retort, but Kevin cut me off. "Now, Brooke, be kind. Claire's doing her best. It's not her fault she couldn't keep up with me." Something in me snapped. Years of pent-up anger and hurt bubbled to the surface. "Keep up with you? Is that what you call it when you manipulate and gaslight someone for years? When you chip away at their confidence until they believe they can't survive without you?" Kevin's eyes widened, his mask of civility slipping for a moment. "Claire, you're making a scene. Think about what people will say." "I don't care what people say," I hissed. "I care about the truth, and the truth is, you're a liar and a cheat, Kevin. You always have been." Brooke stepped between us, her face twisted with anger. "How dare you speak to him like that? You're just jealous because he chose me over you." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Jealous? Of what? Being the next in line for his manipulations? Trust me, honey, you're welcome to him." As I turned to leave, Zachary caught my arm. "Wait," he said, his voice low. "There's more you should know." I hesitated, torn between my desire to flee and my curiosity. In that moment of indecision, I caught a glimpse of something in Kevin's eyes. Fear. And suddenly I knew. This was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. I slammed the door to my condo, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the lock. The encounter in the park had left me reeling, old wounds ripped open and raw. I leaned against the door, closing my eyes and taking a deep breath. The scent of lavender from the diffuser Marie had given me filled the air, a stark contrast to the turmoil in my mind. As I moved through the living room, my eyes fell on a framed photo I'd forgotten to take down. Kevin and I on our wedding day, both smiling, both so young. I picked it up, studying the face of the man I thought I knew. "You were so different then," I whispered, tracing Kevin's face with my finger. Or maybe I was just too blind to see. The memory of our first meeting flooded back, unbidden. The college library, me buried in textbooks, him swaggering up with that charming smile. "Excuse me," he'd said, "but I couldn't help noticing you. I'm Kevin." I'd blushed, stammered out my name. He'd seemed so confident, so worldly. I was smitten from the start. The sound of shattering glass jolted me back to the present. I dropped the frame, the photo now lying amidst shards of glass. As I knelt to clean up the mess, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Meet me at Joe's Diner in an hour. I have information you need." Zachary. My heart raced. What did he know? An hour later, I slid into a booth at Joe's, scanning the diner for Zachary's familiar face. He appeared moments later, sliding in across from me. "Thanks for coming," he said, his voice low. "I wasn't sure you would." "What's this about, Zachary?" I asked, cutting straight to the chase. He leaned forward, his eyes darting around. "It's about Kevin and Brooke. There's more going on than you know." My breath caught. "What do you mean?" "Brooke. She's not who she says she is, and neither is Kevin. Not anymore." Before he could continue, the bell above the diner door jingled. I looked up to see Kevin walk in, his eyes narrowing as he spotted us. "Well, well," he said, approaching our table. "Quite the cozy little meeting we have here." Zachary tensed, but I met Kevin's gaze steadily. "What are you doing here, Kevin?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I could ask you the same thing, Claire. Consorting with strange men now?" "That's rich, coming from you," I shot back. Kevin's smile faltered. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Be careful, Claire. You're playing a dangerous game." "Is that a threat?" I asked, my voice equally low. He straightened, adjusting his tie. "Of course not. Just friendly advice from someone who knows you better than anyone." As he turned to leave, Zachary spoke up. "She knows more than you think, Kevin. It's only a matter of time." Kevin froze, then slowly turned back. For a moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Fear, anger, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual mask of confidence. "I don't know what game you two are playing," he said, "but I'd advise you to stop, now, before someone gets hurt." With that, he strode out of the diner, leaving a wake of tension behind him. I turned back to Zachary, my mind reeling. "What was that about? What do you know?" Zachary sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's complicated, Claire, and dangerous. Are you sure you want to get involved?" I thought of Kevin's smug face in the park, of Brooke's cruel words, of years spent doubting myself, diminished by Kevin's subtle manipulations. A fire ignited in my chest, a determination I hadn't felt in years. "I'm already involved," I said, my voice steady. "Tell me everything." Zachary nodded, then leaned in close. "All right, but remember, once you know this, there's no going back." As he began to speak, I felt a shift in the air around me. This was it, the moment everything would change, and I was ready. I stumbled out of Joe's diner, my mind reeling from Zachary's revelations. The cool evening air hit my face, grounding me momentarily. As I fumbled for my car keys, a familiar voice called out, "Claire, is that you?" I turned to see Marie, my neighbor, approaching with a concerned look on her face. At 65, she moved with the grace of the actress she once was, her silver hair catching the streetlight. "Marie," I breathed, relieved to see a friendly face. "What are you doing here?" She raised an eyebrow. "I could ask you the same thing, dear. You look like you've seen a ghost." I hesitated, then made a split-second decision. "Can we talk? I could use some advice." Marie nodded, linking her arm through mine. "Of course. Let's head back to the building. I'll make us some tea." As we walked, I filled Marie in on the events of the past 2 days. Her eyes widened at the mention of Kevin's infidelity and Zachary's cryptic warnings. Once in her apartment, Marie busied herself with the tea while I sank into her plush sofa. The room was a testament to her colorful past. Playbills adorned the walls, and a shelf full of awards glinted in the soft lamplight. "So," Marie said, handing me a steaming cup, "what exactly did Zachary tell you?" I took a deep breath. "He said Kevin and Brooke are involved in something illegal, some kind of investment fraud scheme, and that they're targeting vulnerable people. Retirees, widows, people like that." Marie's face darkened. "That's despicable." "I know, and the worst part is, I'm not even surprised. It's exactly the kind of thing Kevin would do." Marie reached out, patting my hand. "Claire, listen to me. You're stronger than you know. You've already taken the first step by leaving him. Now it's time to take back your power." As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Meet me at the Blue Harbor Quay tomorrow at 2 p.m. Tom." My heart skipped a beat. Tom, My college sweetheart, the one I'd let slip away when Kevin came along. What was he doing here? Everything all right? Marie asked, noticing my expression. I showed her the text. Tom was someone special before Kevin. Marie's eyes twinkled. Well, isn't that interesting timing? The universe works in mysterious ways, dear. The next day, I found myself outside the Blue Harbor Cafe, my stomach in knots. As I approached the entrance, I saw him, Tom, looking even more handsome than I remembered, his salt and pepper hair giving him a distinguished air. Claire, he said, standing as I approached. It's been too long. I smiled, genuinely happy to see him. Tom, what are you doing here? He gestured for me to sit. I heard about what happened with Kevin. I'm so sorry, Claire. I always knew he was bad news. My defenses rose. You didn't come all this way just to say, I told you so, did you? Tom shook his head, leaning in. No, I came because I think you might be in danger. Kevin's gotten himself mixed up with some dangerous people, Claire, and I'm worried you might get caught in the crossfire. My blood ran cold. How do you know all this? I work in corporate security now. We've been investigating a major fraud case, and Kevin's name keeps coming up. Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from Zachary. They know we talked. Watch your back. I looked up at Tom, fear gripping my heart. Tom, I think you're right. I am in danger. His face hardened with determination. Then let me help you, Claire. We'll figure this out together. As I nodded, accepting his offer, I felt a shift in the air. This was more than just about getting back at Kevin now. This was about survival. And as I looked into Tom's eyes, I realized I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. The game had changed, and the stakes were higher than ever. But for the first time in years, I felt ready to face whatever came next. I stood outside Evelyn's house, my heart pounding. The annual Franklin family gathering loomed before me, a tradition I'd once cherished but now dreaded. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door. The chatter inside died as I entered. Evelyn, my former mother-in-law, approached with a tight smile. Claire, dear, we weren't sure you'd come. I wouldn't miss it, Evelyn, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. As I made my way through the crowd, I caught snippets of hushed conversations. Can't believe she showed up. After what happened with Kevin. I held my head high, refusing to let their whispers affect me. Then I saw him. Kevin, standing in the corner with Brooke draped over his arm. Our eyes met, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something. Regret? Fear? Before his usual smug expression took over. Claire, he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. So glad you could make it. We were just talking about you. I felt the room's attention shift to me. This was it. The moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Were you? I asked, my voice cool. All good things, I hope. Brooke giggled, a sound that grated on my nerves. Oh, we were just saying how well you seem to be coping. Living in that tiny condo, still at the same job. It's admirable, really. I saw red. All the anger, all the hurt I'd been holding back surged to the surface. You know what's really admirable, Brooke? The way you've managed to keep your little side business a secret for so long. The room fell silent. Kevin's face paled. Claire, what are you talking about? I turned to face the room. Did you all know that Kevin and his lovely girlfriend here are involved in an investment fraud scheme? Targeting retirees and widows, no less. Gasps echoed through the room. Evelyn stepped forward, her face a mask of shock. Claire, that's a serious accusation. Do you have any proof? I pulled out my phone, bringing up the files Tom had helped me compile. I have bank statements, emails, recorded conversations. Would you like to see them, Evelyn? Kevin lunged forward, grabbing my arm. You have no idea what you're doing, he hissed. I wrenched my arm free. Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm exposing you for the fraud you are, Kevin, both personally and professionally. Brooke's face contorted with rage. You bitch! You'll regret this. No, Brooke, I said calmly. The only thing I regret is not seeing Kevin for who he really was sooner. I turned to Evelyn, whose face had aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Evelyn, but your son isn't the man you think he is. As the room erupted into chaos, I made my way to the door. Kevin's voice rang out behind me. Claire, don't do this, please. We can work something out. I paused at the threshold, turning back to face him one last time. It's too late for that, Kevin. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The truth was out, and there was no going back. My phone buzzed, a text from Tom. "How did it go? Are you okay?" I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. But as I walked to my car, a chill ran down my spine. I remembered Zachary's warning about dangerous people. Had I just painted a target on my back? I got into my car, my mind racing. What would Kevin and Brooke do now that they'd been exposed? How far would they go to protect themselves? And more importantly, what was my next move? As I drove away from Evelyn's house, I knew one thing for certain. The real battle was just beginning. And I had to be ready for whatever came next. I paced my living room, adrenaline still coursing through my veins from the confrontation at Evelyn's. My phone buzzed incessantly. Missed calls from Kevin, angry texts from Brooke, concerned messages from family members. I ignored them all, focusing instead on my next move. A knock at the door startled me. I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. Marie stood outside, her face etched with concern. "Claire, dear, are you all right?" she asked as I opened the door. "I heard about what happened at the gathering." I ushered her in, grateful for her presence. "I'm fine, Marie. Just processing everything." She settled on the couch, patting the spot next to her. "Tell me everything." As I recounted the events, Marie's expression shifted from concern to determination. "Claire, you've taken the first step. Now we need to make sure you're protected." "Protected?" I echoed. Marie nodded gravely. "Kevin and Brooke won't take this lying down. We need to be prepared for their retaliation." As if on cue, my phone rang. Tom's name flashed on the screen. "Claire," he said urgently when I answered. "I've been doing some digging. The fraud goes deeper than we thought. There are some powerful people involved." My heart raced. "How powerful?" "Powerful enough to make problems disappear," Tom replied ominously. "We need to meet. Now." I agreed, ending the call with shaking hands. Marie squeezed my arm. "Go. I'll stay here and keep an eye on things." An hour later, I sat across from Tom in a dimly lit cafe, my mind reeling from the information he'd shared. The fraud scheme wasn't just about money. It involved blackmail, political favors, and even ties to organized crime. "Claire," Tom said softly, reaching for my hand. "You're in over your head. Maybe we should go to the authorities." I pulled my hand away, shaking my head. "No, I've come too far to back down now. There must be a way to expose all of this." Tom's eyes widened. "It's dangerous, Claire. These people won't hesitate to." A commotion at the cafe entrance cut him off. My blood ran cold as I saw Kevin push his way inside, his face contorted with rage. "You!" he snarled, storming towards our table. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I stood facing him squarely. "I've done what I should have done years ago, Kevin. Exposed you for who you really are." He grabbed my arm, his grip painfully tight. "You've ruined everything, and for what? Revenge?" Tom intervened, pushing Kevin back. "Let her go, Kevin, it's over." Kevin's eyes darted between us, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Oh, I see, you two are in this together. How touching." He leaned in close, his voice a menacing whisper. "You have no idea what you're up against, Claire. Back off now, or I promise you'll regret it." With that, he stormed out, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. I sank back into my chair, my mind racing. Tom reached across the table, his eyes filled with concern. "Claire, we need to be smart about this. Kevin's right. We don't know what we're up against." I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "No, Tom, we can't back down now. Too many people have been hurt by this scheme. We need to end it." "But how?" Tom asked. A plan began to form in my mind. It was risky, potentially dangerous, but it might be our only chance. "The community gala next week," I said slowly. "Everyone will be there. It's the perfect opportunity to expose everything." Tom's eyes widened. "Claire, that's incredibly risky. Are you sure about this?" I met his gaze, feeling a surge of determination. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. As we left the cafe, I knew I was standing at a crossroads. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but for the first time in years, I felt truly alive. Kevin and his cronies had underestimated me for the last time. The seeds of retribution had been sown. Now it was time to watch them grow. The grand ballroom of the Ocean View Hotel buzzed with anticipation. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the city's elite, gathered for the annual community gala. I smoothed down my midnight blue gown, my heart racing beneath the silky fabric. Tonight was the night. Everything I'd worked for, every piece of evidence I'd gathered, It all came down to this moment. I scanned the room, spotting Kevin and Brooke near the bar. They looked confident, unaware of the storm about to break. Tom appeared at my side, his hand brushing mine reassuringly. "Are you ready?" he whispered. I nodded, my throat tight. "As I'll ever be." We made our way through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries with familiar faces. I caught sight of Marie, elegant in a silver gown, giving me an encouraging nod. My ally in this fight. The MC's voice boomed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our keynote speaker, Mr. Kevin Franklin." Applause filled the room as Kevin took the stage, his charismatic smile firmly in place. I felt a familiar twist in my gut, remembering how that smile once fooled me. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Kevin began. "As you know, our community has always prided itself on integrity and trust." I almost laughed at the irony. As Kevin continued his speech, I made my way to the AV booth where Tom's friend waited with our evidence queued up. "Now?" he asked as I approached. I took a deep breath. "Now." Suddenly, the large screen behind Kevin flickered to life. His voice faltered as images and documents began to flash across the screen. Bank statements, emails, recorded conversations, all damning evidence of the fraud scheme he and Brooke had been running. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Kevin's face paled as he realized what was happening. "What is this?" he demanded, his composure cracking. I stepped forward, my voice steady. "This, Kevin, is the truth about your business ventures, about how you've been scamming innocent people out of their life savings." Brooke rushed to the stage, her face contorted with rage. "You bitch! You'll pay for this!" Security guards moved in, but I stood my ground. "No, Brooke. You and Kevin are the ones who will pay. The authorities are already on their way." As if on cue, sirens wailed in the distance. Panic erupted in the ballroom. People pushed towards the exits, whispering and pointing. In the chaos, I lost sight of Kevin and Brooke. Suddenly, a hand gripped my arm, yanking me backwards. Kevin's voice hissed in my ear. "You think you've won? You have no idea what you've done." I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened painfully. "Let go of me, Kevin." "Not until you listen," he snarled. "This goes deeper than you know. There are people involved who won't hesitate to silence you permanently." Fear coursed through me, but I refused to show it. "Is that a threat?" His eyes were wild, desperate. "It's a warning. For old time's sake, get out of town, Claire. Disappear. It's your only chance." Before I could respond, Tom appeared, forcefully separating us. "It's over, Kevin. Let her go." Kevin's gaze darted between us, a mix of anger and something else, fear, in his eyes. "You're both fools," he spat, before disappearing into the crowd. As the police burst into the ballroom, Tom pulled me close. "Are you okay?" I nodded, my mind reeling. We'd done it. We'd exposed the truth. But Kevin's warning echoed in my ears. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. In the chaos of arrests and questioning that followed, one thought kept circling in my mind. What had I unleashed? And more importantly, how far was I willing to go to see this through to the end? As I watched Kevin being led away in handcuffs, our eyes met one last time. In that moment, I realized the true battle was just beginning, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. The days following the gala were a whirlwind of police interviews, media frenzy, and sleepless nights. I sat in my condo, surrounded by newspapers emblazoned with headlines about Kevin's arrest and the unraveling of his fraud scheme. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages from friends, family, and even strangers offering congratulations or seeking information. A sharp knock at the door jolted me from my thoughts. I approached cautiously, my nerves still on edge. Through the peephole, I saw a face I never expected to see again. Kevin. My heart raced as I opened the door, keeping the security chain in place. "What are you doing here? How did you get out?" His once confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a haggard, desperate look. "Please, Claire, I need to talk to you. It's important." Against my better judgment, I let him in. He stumbled into the living room, collapsing onto the couch. "Claire," he began, his voice breaking, "I'm sorry for everything. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need your help." I stood, arms crossed, maintaining my distance. "Help with what, Kevin? Haven't you done enough damage?" He looked up, his eyes wild with fear. "You were right about everything. The fraud, the lies, but it goes deeper than you know. There are people involved, powerful people. They're coming after me, and they'll come after you too." A chill ran down my spine. "What are you talking about?" The scheme wasn't just about money, Kevin explained, his words tumbling out. It was about power, influence. We were laundering money for some very dangerous individuals, and now that it's all out in the open, they want to tie up loose ends. I felt the room spin. And I'm a loose end? Kevin nodded grimly. We both are. Claire, I know I have no right to ask, but we need to work together. It's the only way we'll survive this. Before I could respond, my phone rang. It was Tom. Claire, he said urgently, are you okay? There's been a break-in at my office. All our files on Kevin's case are gone. My blood ran cold. I looked at Kevin, who seemed to shrink under my gaze. Tom, I need you to come over, now, and bring Marie if you can. Within the hour, my small condo was filled with tension. Tom paced by the window, while Marie sat beside me, her hand on my arm. Kevin sat alone, looking defeated. So what do we do now? Tom asked, his voice tight with anger. I took a deep breath, weighing our options. We need to go to the authorities, tell them everything. Kevin shook his head vehemently. No, you don't understand. These people have connections everywhere. The police, the government, we'd be signing our death warrants. Marie spoke up, her voice calm but firm. Then what do you suggest, Kevin? Run? Hide? That's no way to live. A heavy silence fell over the room. I felt the weight of the decision on my shoulders. Everything I'd fought for, my newfound independence, my future with Tom, it was all at risk. Suddenly, a crash echoed through the condo as the living room window shattered. A brick lay among the glass shards, a note tied around it. With shaking hands, I unfolded the paper. 2 words were scrawled in red. Back off. Tom pulled me close, his body tense. That's it. We're getting you out of here. But as I looked around at the faces of those I cared about, Tom, Marie, and even Kevin, I knew I couldn't run. This was my fight, and I had to see it through. No, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. We end this. Now. I met each of their gazes, seeing a mix of fear and determination reflected back. In that moment, I realized that the true test of my strength wasn't just in exposing Kevin's lies, but in facing the consequences of my actions. As sirens wailed in the distance, I steeled myself for what was to come. The final battle was upon us, and I was ready to fight. The salty breeze tousled my hair as I sat at our favorite seaside cafe, waiting for Tom. The past few months had been a whirlwind of legal battles, police protection, and finally justice. Kevin and his co-conspirators were behind bars, the dangerous individuals backing their scheme exposed and facing prosecution. It felt surreal, like waking from a long, tumultuous dream. I spotted Tom walking towards me, his smile warming me more than the afternoon sun. As he sat down, he reached for my hand, his touch grounding me in the present. How are you feeling? He asked, his eyes searching mine. I took a deep breath, considering the question. Relieved, exhausted, but mostly free. Tom nodded, understanding etched in his features. We'd been through hell together, facing threats, navigating the complex web of Kevin's deceit, and ultimately emerging stronger. Our relationship, rekindled amidst the chaos, had been my anchor. I have something to tell you, I said, my heart racing with a different kind of anticipation now. Tom leaned in, concern flickering across his face. What is it, Claire? I placed my free hand on my stomach, a smile tugging at my lips. I'm pregnant. His eyes widened, a mix of shock and joy spreading across his face. Oh, Claire. He stood up, pulling me into an embrace that lifted me off my feet. As he set me down, I saw tears in his eyes matching my own. Are you happy? I asked, suddenly feeling vulnerable. Tom cupped my face in his hands. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. I love you, Claire. You and our baby. As we sat back down, hands intertwined, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. This was what I had fought for. Not just justice, but the chance at a new life, filled with love and possibility. You know, Tom said, his thumb tracing circles on my hand. I've been thinking about the future. About us. I raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. Oh. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. My breath caught in my throat. Claire Franklin, he began, his voice thick with emotion. You are the strongest, most resilient woman I know. You've faced your past, fought for your future, and through it all, you've shown me what true courage looks like. I want to spend the rest of my life by your side, supporting you, loving you, and building a family together. Will you marry me? Tears streamed down my face as I nodded, words failing me. As Tom slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt the final pieces of my new life falling into place. Later that evening, as we walked along the beach, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. I thought of Marie, whose wisdom and support had been invaluable, of Evelyn, who had eventually seen the truth about her son, and even of Kevin, whose actions had inadvertently set me on this path to self-discovery and true happiness. "What are you thinking about?" Tom asked, squeezing my hand. I smiled, looking out at the endless horizon. About how sometimes the threads of our lives that seem to unravel are actually weaving us into something stronger, more beautiful. As we stood there, the waves lapping at our feet, I placed a hand on my stomach, feeling the promise of new life growing within me. I had faced my past, reclaimed my power, and now I was ready to embrace the future. Not as the woman Kevin had tried to mold me into, but as the resilient, independent person I had always been meant to be. The sun dipped below the horizon, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. With Tom by my side and a new life growing inside me, I felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. For the first time in years, I was truly completely free, and in that freedom, I had found my strength, my voice, and my happily ever after. I was standing in the kitchen, the phone pressed against my ear, disbelief washing over me in cold waves. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harper, your mother passed away." The voice on the other end, a doctor from Chicago General Hospital, sounded distant, like a faint echo in a long, empty hallway. "My mother?" I murmured, my voice barely a whisper. The room spun, and I gripped the countertop for support. Last week, we had talked about her coming over for Thanksgiving. She was fine then. How could this be? I had to tell Martin. He had been working in Europe for the past 3 months, and communication had been sparse, but he needed to know. I dialed his number, my hands trembling. After several rings, he answered. "Martin, it's Elaine. My mom, she passed away." There was a pause, and then his voice, devoid of warmth, came through. "Oh, I see. Look, Elaine, I'm really tied up right now. I've got a trip planned with the guys to Barcelona. Can't really skip it." His words hit me like a physical blow. "You're not coming back? Not even for the funeral?" I struggled to keep my voice steady. "Elaine, you know how it is with my job. I'll be back in a couple of months. Just handle things there, okay?" And without waiting for my response, he hung up. I stood there, the phone still in my hand, feeling a hollow emptiness growing inside me. My mother was gone, and the man I had spent 20 years with couldn't care less. The next few days passed in a blur of arrangements and condolences, a relentless march of reality that I navigated like a ghost. It was on the 3rd day, in the midst of this, that I received another call that seemed to stop time altogether. It was Martin's brother, Alex. "Elaine, there's been an accident. Mom and Dad, they're gone." The phone slipped from my grasp and clattered to the floor. Martin's parents, too? It felt like some cruel joke, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I called Martin, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I left message after message, each one more desperate than the last. I couldn't go to his parents' funeral. Without Martin, I was just an outsider, a reminder of the son who couldn't be bothered to show up. The thought of their empty seats, an unspoken accusation in the air, was unbearable. As the days passed, I found myself sitting alone in the house we had built together, surrounded by memories that now seemed like lies. I thought back to how we met, introduced by our fathers, who were old college friends. It had felt like a fairy tale then, our families joining together in a bond of love and friendship. But as the years went by, the fairy tale had slowly faded. Martin was always busy, always absent. His work was his life, and I, along with our son Peter, were just fixtures in his world. When Peter was 10, my father passed away. My rock, my confidant, gone. Martin had been away on a business trip then, too. I was left alone to deal with the grief, to support our son, to keep the family together. And now, with both our families shattered, I was alone again. Our marriage had become a routine of loneliness and resentment. I was the homemaker, the silent supporter, while Martin was the absent provider. But was he really providing, or just running away from a life he no longer wanted? I tried to remember the last time we had laughed together or shared a moment of genuine connection. But all I could see was the growing distance between us, a chasm filled with unspoken words and unmet needs. As I sat there, lost in my thoughts, I realized that this wasn't just about his absence. It was about the lack of respect, the lack of empathy. It was about a marriage that had become a hollow shell of what it once was. And as the sun set, casting long shadows across the room, I knew that something had to change. I couldn't live in this shadow any longer. The days following the funerals were a whirlwind of silent houses and unanswered calls. I tried to reach Martin again, but it was as if he had vanished off the face of the earth. That's when the memories began to creep in, unwelcome and unbidden. I remembered our early days, how Martin's charm and ambition had swept me off my feet. We were young, in love, and the world seemed full of possibilities. But as years passed, the man I fell in love with started to fade, replaced by someone consumed by work and his own needs. I was pulled from my reverie by a knock on the door. Standing there was Alex, Martin's younger brother. His eyes were red-rimmed, his usual cheerful demeanor nowhere in sight. "Elaine, I can't believe he didn't show up. Not even a call," he said, his voice heavy with grief and disbelief. "I know, Alex. I've been trying to reach him, but..." Nothing. Alex shook his head, his anger palpable. "You know, Elaine, there's something deeply wrong with him. Mom and Dad deserved better. You deserve better." His words struck a chord in me. Deserve better. The thought had crossed my mind, but hearing it from someone else made it real. It wasn't just me feeling this way. "Elaine, if you need anything, just let me know, okay?" Alex offered before he left, a hint of worry in his eyes. That night, as I lay in bed, the house eerily quiet, I realized how much of my life I had dedicated to a man who saw me as nothing more than a convenience. The love, the support, the sacrifices, it was as if they meant nothing to him. A mixture of anger and resolve began to build within me. I wasn't going to be the silent, suffering wife anymore. I needed to find out what Martin was up to, what was so important that he couldn't even show up for his own parents' funeral. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I hired a private investigator. It was a drastic step, but I needed to know the truth. The PI was a middle-aged woman named Sarah, who had a no-nonsense air about her. "We'll find out what he's up to," Sarah assured me. "It won't take long." True to her word, within a week, Sarah came back with information that shattered any illusions I had left about Martin. Photos and reports of him with another woman in Barcelona, looking carefree and in love. As I looked at the photos, a cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't just a business trip. This was a betrayal of everything our marriage was supposed to stand for. I confronted Martin over the phone. His response was a cocktail of excuses and deflections. "Elaine, you're blowing this out of proportion. It's just a work thing." "A work thing? Is that what you call this?" I countered, my voice shaking with anger. "You wouldn't understand. It's complicated," he snapped back, his voice cold and distant. I realized then that I was speaking to a stranger. The man I had married, the man I had built a life with, was gone. In his place was someone who saw me as nothing more than a hurdle to his desires. That night, as I lay awake, the weight of my decision heavy on my chest, I knew there was no going back. Martin had made his choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. I would no longer be a prisoner in my own life. The days after discovering Martin's betrayal were a blur of anger and disillusionment. Each morning, I awoke to the stark reality of my solitary struggle. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now echoed with the silence of betrayal. I busied myself with the mundane tasks of daily life, but my mind was elsewhere, consumed with thoughts of Martin's deceit. The images from the investigator's report haunted me, a constant reminder of his infidelity. One evening, as I was going through old photo albums, a picture of our wedding day caught my eye. We looked so happy, so in love. I couldn't help but wonder where it had all gone wrong. Was it gradual, or had there been a specific moment when Martin decided I was no longer enough for him? My train of thought was interrupted by a call from Peter, our son. "Hey, Mom, how are you holding up?" "I'm managing, Peter," I replied, trying to sound stronger than I felt. There was a pause before he spoke again, his voice laced with concern. "Mom, I've been thinking. Maybe I should come home for a while, help you through this." His offer touched me deeply, but I couldn't let him put his life on hold for me. "No, Peter, you need to focus on your studies. I'll be fine." But Peter was insistent. "Mom, this isn't just about you. Dad's actions affect me too. I need to be there for you." His determination was a balm to my wounded heart. Despite Martin's absence, Peter had grown into a caring and responsible young man. His support gave me strength, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel so alone. A few days later, Peter arrived. His presence filled the house with a much-needed energy. We spent hours talking, sharing our thoughts and feelings about Martin and the situation at hand. "It's just so selfish, Mom. How could Dad do this to us?" Peter's anger mirrored my own. "I don't know, Peter, but I do know that we can't let his actions destroy us. We're stronger than that." As we talked, a plan began to form in my mind. Martin had taken so much from us, it was time he understood the consequences of his actions. I wasn't going to be the silent victim anymore. It was time for Martin to face the music. The following week, I met with a lawyer to discuss the possibility of divorce. The lawyer, a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Hammond, listened intently as I recounted the events of the past few weeks. "Mrs. Harper, based on what you've told me, you have a strong case for divorce, especially with the evidence of infidelity," she said, her tone professional yet empathetic. I nodded, a mix of relief and apprehension washing over me. This was really happening. I was taking the first step towards freeing myself from Martin's shadow. As I left Mrs. Hammond's office, a newfound sense of purpose filled me. I was no longer the woman who waited silently for her husband to return. I was Elaine Harper, and I was going to take control of my life. But as I stood there looking out at the bustling city streets, a part of me couldn't help but mourn the loss of the life I thought I had. The happy family, the loving husband, it was all an illusion, shattered by the harsh light of reality. As I headed home, I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Martin had underestimated me for the last time. The revelation of Martin's affair had set a fire within me, one that burned with the need for justice and retribution. As I sat in our living room, the walls seemed to close in on me, each family portrait a reminder of the facade our life had become. My resolve was tested one evening when Martin called. His voice, once familiar and comforting, now grated on my nerves. "Elaine, I've been thinking. Maybe I was too harsh. We should talk when I get back." His words, meant to soothe, only fueled my anger. "Talk? After everything you've done? You abandoned your family, Martin." "Elaine, you're overreacting. It's not like I planned this. Things just happened," he replied, his tone dismissive, as if his betrayal was a mere inconvenience. "Things just happened? You make it sound like you had no choice in the matter. You chose to be with another woman. You chose to ignore your own parents' funeral." There was silence on the other end, and for a moment, I thought he had hung up. Then he spoke, his voice cold. "I don't have time for this, Elaine. I have important work here." That was the last straw. "Important work? Is that what you call abandoning your family? You know what, Martin? Maybe it's time I made some important decisions of my own." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. It was time for action. The next day, I met with Sarah, the private investigator. "We need more evidence, anything that can help in the divorce proceedings," I told her, my voice firm. Sarah nodded, understanding the assignment. "I'll see what I can dig up. Martin won't know what hit him." Over the next few weeks, Sarah provided me with a steady stream of evidence. Photos, emails, and even testimonies from people who had seen Martin with his mistress. It was more than enough to paint a clear picture of his infidelity. Armed with this information, I met with Mrs. Hammond again. She reviewed the evidence, her expression grim. "This will certainly help your case, Mrs. Harper. It seems Mr. Harper has been quite careless." As we discussed the next steps, a plan began to take shape. Martin had always been proud of his reputation, both personally and professionally. It was time to use that against him. "Mrs. Hammond, I want to make sure Martin feels the consequences of his actions, not just legally, but personally and professionally as well." Mrs. Hammond regarded me with a new level of respect. "I understand, Mrs. Harper. We'll make sure he gets what he deserves." When Martin finally returned home, it was to a cold and unwelcoming house. I greeted him with divorce papers, my expression as hard as the resolve within me. "Elaine, what is this?" he asked, his voice a mix of surprise and annoyance. "It's over, Martin. I'm filing for divorce, and before you try to talk your way out of this, Know that I have enough evidence to ruin you." Martin's face turned a shade paler, his usual confident demeanor crumbling. "You wouldn't dare," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I dare, Martin. I dare to stand up for myself and for our son. You've made your choices, and now you'll live with the consequences." As he read through the papers, his face twisted in anger and disbelief. But there was no going back. I had drawn the line, and there was no crossing it. That night, as Martin packed his bags and left, I felt a sense of liberation. The chains of our loveless marriage were finally broken. I was free, free to start anew, free from the lies and deceit that had bound me for so long. As I watched him drive away, a sense of justice filled me. This was just the beginning. Martin would soon learn that his actions had consequences, consequences that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The days following Martin's departure were filled with a tumultuous mix of emotions. Anger, relief, and a sense of vindication swirled within me. The house, now void of his presence, felt larger, as if it too had been holding its breath under his oppressive shadow. My resolve was tested when I received a call from Martin, his tone a mix of anger and desperation. "Elaine, you're ruining me. The divorce papers, the allegations. Do you realize what you're doing?" His words were like fuel to my fire. "Yes, Martin, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm showing the world who you really are." "You can't do this to me. I've worked hard for everything I have," he argued, his voice laced with entitlement. "Worked hard? You mean you've lied and cheated your way through our marriage? You've made your bed, Martin. Now you have to lie in it." Martin's voice rose, a crescendo of frustration and disbelief. "You were nothing before me. You think you can just take everything?" I felt a surge of power at his words. "I was nothing? No, Martin. I was everything you didn't appreciate. And now I'm taking back what's mine." The call ended with Martin's threats echoing in my ears, but they no longer held any power over me. I was done being the victim. As the divorce proceedings began, Martin's true nature became evident for all to see. His attempts to hide assets and slander me only served to damage his reputation further. The evidence Sarah had gathered painted a clear picture of his deceit and infidelity. The court hearings were tense, with Martin's lawyers trying every trick in the book. But Mrs. Hammond was a force to be reckoned with, countering their moves with precision and finesse. Throughout it all, Peter stood by my side, his support unwavering. He had grown disillusioned with his father, the truth eroding any semblance of respect he once held. The day the divorce was finalized was a day of liberation. As the judge declared our marriage dissolved, a weight lifted from my shoulders. I had won, not just the divorce, but my freedom from Martin's shadow. After the court session, Martin approached me, a shell of the man he once was. "Elaine, please, we can still fix this." I looked at him, really looked at him, and what I saw was a man broken by his own arrogance. "There's nothing left to fix, Martin. You broke everything worth saving." Walking away from him, I felt a chapter of my life closing. The pain, the betrayal, the lies, they were all behind me now. Ahead lay a path of my own making, free from the deceit that had clouded my life for so long. As I stepped out of the courthouse, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing the world in a warm, golden light. It felt like a sign, a promise of new beginnings and brighter days ahead. I turned to Peter, a smile spreading across my face. "Let's go home, son. We have a new life to start." And with that, we walked away, leaving Martin and the past where they belonged, behind us. With the divorce finalized, I was determined to reveal the extent of Martin's disgrace to those who had been blinded by his facade. I knew that true justice wouldn't come from the courts alone. It had to come from exposing him to the world. I started by reaching out to our mutual friends, people who had known us as a couple for years. The initial reactions were mixed, with some refusing to believe the truth, but I had evidence, undeniable proof of his infidelity and deceit. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. One evening, I invited a few friends over, people who had doubted me initially. As they sat in my living room, I showed them the messages and pictures Sarah had gathered. Shock and disbelief filled the room as they saw Martin's true colors laid bare. One friend, Lisa, shook her head in disbelief. "I can't believe I defended him all this time. He's a monster." Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded. "He fooled us all, but now you know." Lisa was the first to take action. She contacted others in our social circle, sharing the evidence and urging them to reconsider their alliances. Soon, the once seemingly impenetrable wall of support around Martin began to crumble. One by one, our friends distanced themselves from him, appalled by his actions. The same people who had once admired him now saw him for what he was, a selfish, deceitful man who had no regard for anyone but himself. As Martin's social standing crumbled, he became increasingly isolated. His attempts to salvage his reputation only made things worse, as he lashed out at those who had abandoned him. His once strong network of contacts began to disappear, leaving him with no one to turn to. I watched with a sense of grim satisfaction as the man who had caused me so much pain faced the consequences of his actions. It wasn't enough for him to lose his friends. I wanted him to lose everything. One day, I received a call from Martin's former boss, Mr. Reynolds. He had heard about the divorce and the scandal surrounding Martin. Elaine, I had no idea. I can't believe he would do such things. I sighed, my voice heavy with exhaustion. It's been a long time coming, Mr. Reynolds. Martin's true nature finally caught up with him. Mr. Reynolds paused, then spoke with a hint of regret. I'm sorry to hear about all of this, but I wanted to let you know that Martin's behavior at the company has also come to light. We've decided to terminate his employment. I felt a rush of vindication. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. It's about time he faced the consequences. As the news of Martin's termination spread, his world crumbled further. He had lost his job, his friends, and his reputation. It was a fall from grace that he couldn't recover from. But I wasn't done yet. I had one final move to make, one that would ensure Martin paid for his actions in the most significant way possible. With Martin's world in shambles, it was time for the final blow, the ultimate revenge that would ensure he paid for his sins. I had discovered a hidden secret during the divorce proceedings, one that would bring him to his knees. Late one evening, as I sat in my quiet home, I made the call I had been dreading but also eagerly anticipating. The voice on the other end was familiar, cold, and detached. Martin, we need to talk. There was a long pause before he replied, his voice wary. What do you want, Elaine? I want justice, Martin. I want you to pay for everything you've done. My words were deliberate, each one carrying the weight of my anger and determination. Martin chuckled, a mocking sound that sent shivers down my spine. You think you can do anything to me now? I've lost it all, Elaine. What more could you possibly take from me? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I know about your hidden accounts, Martin, the offshore ones you thought were safe. I have the evidence, and I'm not afraid to expose you. Silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I could hear the panic in his voice when he finally responded. How did you? That's not important right now, I interrupted. What matters is that I have the power to ruin you completely. The authorities will be very interested in those accounts, Martin. His voice trembled as he spoke, desperation creeping in. What do you want, Elaine? Money? Is that what this is about? I couldn't help but laugh. A bitter and vindictive sound. Money won't fix the damage you've done, Martin. But it will ensure you suffer for a long time. I outlined my terms, a substantial portion of his hidden wealth to be transferred to me as compensation for the years of pain and betrayal. Martin had no choice but to agree, his voice defeated. As I hung up the phone, I felt a rush of satisfaction. Martin had lost everything, his job, his reputation, and now his secret wealth. He was a broken man, a shadow of his former self. But I had won. I had taken back control of my life, exposed him for the monster he was, and ensured that he would pay for his actions. It was a sweet victory, one that had been a long time coming. In the end, it wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my own dignity and self-worth. I had emerged from the darkness stronger and more resilient than ever. As I sat alone in my quiet home, I couldn't help but smile. The nightmare was finally over, and I was free to live my life on my terms. Martin's downfall was a satisfying end to a chapter of my life that I was more than ready to leave behind.